Hi, Steve. Thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate you
Thank you.
giving us your expertise. So let's jump right in with some questions. Sound good?
That's fine.
All right, great. So, with these unprecedented times that we're finding ourselves in right now, I'm wondering if you can share with us how the coronavirus pandemic has impacted fair housing practices, just with regard to your experience so far in this pandemic.
What we've experienced is overall a bit of a drop off on the general fair housing kind of calls and complaints that we receive. But what we are getting though is more moratorium, landlord tenant type questions. People are very confused, very unsure about what the situation is. For example, the people that have received notices to quit or they're behind in their rent and they're not sure what to do. There's some vague understanding that the landlord can't file, but they're not sure what to do. And so it just puts that, and I think maybe it's on the housing provider side as well. They're not sure what to do. Other problem that we receive too is that people are calling because they need housing. They know that when they go out and look for housing and that they don't think they can't get into the office. They have, we have to keep a distance in that. So they don't know what to do. And so it's put a crimp on people getting alternative housing. The other part, which is real disturbing, and I think it's, maybe, the people who watch this video will think that, that there are 4 main fair housing centers in the state and there's legal services out in Flint. But all of us are seeing seems to be hitting people with disability more than the general population. It's becoming a real problem. Whether it's in the Detroit area with gentrification, people wanting new tenants in to pay the market rate or whatever, but we're seeing more acts like that targeted against people with disabilities. It runs a gambit. There are a variety of things that are occurring, but almost far overwhelming majority has to do with people with the disabilities, and it's very, very concerning. That's a very vulnerable population, and they're facing the brunt of it.
When you say people with disabilities, can you explain what that includes?
Yeah, I mean, Fair Housing Act, people think it's followed under the ADA. The ADA is modeled after the Fair Housing Act under the Rehabilitation Act. So that's the way the progression goes. But it's people that, are on Social Security would be one, Social Security disability, people with, mental impairments, those kinds of things. Just a general category of what you would consider someone with a disability.
So why do you think that's happening right now? Is that a kind of a byproduct of the coronavirus issues? And is there a specific reason why that's more focused on?
Maybe it gives cover, or maybe, it's always present. I just see a lot more of it now. Maybe because of the reasonable accommodation, reasonable modification requirements. That could be something. When you're dealing with someone with a disability, they have unique needs. And there's no question it's going to require a bit more from a housing provider or from an apartment complex. It could be emotional support, and it could be a variety of things. But the law says you have to do it. You have to make the housing available. You have to make reasonable accommodation and modifications so that they can use and enjoy their property as a non-disabled person can do.
We do work very hard as realtors to educate our realtors, our community, on what those laws are. Obviously, real estate is what we call local. So we deal with federal laws, state laws, and we are, especially with regard to landlords or property managers, we found a lot of issues. So we're seeing some of the same things.
I would say underlying the Fair Housing Act is the idea that an agent, real estate agent, broker, whatever, brings expertise into any housing transaction. There are exemptions under the Fair Housing Act, single family, and they call it the Mrs. Murphy, but those are no exceptions or no exemptions with the single family. If there's a real estate agent involved, with Congress, I've even read the legislative history, Congress had the idea that if there's a real estate agent involved, the person involved in the real estate transaction should know the law and will hold them accountable. So it presumes the broker has expertise, the real agent has expertise, and will communicate that and bring that to bear during the transaction. I get really troubled when I see that doesn't occur.
Yeah, we have we're speaking about realtors, which I won't get into the weeds, but there's a difference between a real estate agent and a realtor. There's about 1.4 million realtors in the country, and we have a code of ethics that we're required to follow. And a lot of this falls under that. So it's disturbing to hear that's the issue. And that's part of the reason that we're having this conversation today. Really looking for some guidance, trying to educate our realtors, take them further, especially with this month being Fair Housing Month. And we know this is, I think, the 52nd anniversary of the Fair Housing Act. So we should be better at it by now.
I use the terminology broker, agent, realtor, kind of synonymous. I shouldn't. I mean, your group knows the distinction. But I am familiar with the ethical rules. They track the Fair Housing Act. It's virtually almost like verbatim quoting it. So it's basically taking chunks of the Fair Housing Act, put it right into your ethical rules, which is unique. Right. No other. I don't know of any other ethical rules that actually do that.
No, we are a unique codified set of ethics in that way, that we take the law, and then sometimes we don't go beyond, we don't go outside of the law, but in a lot of cases we do go beyond the law, especially with other protections with regard to sexual orientation, gender identity, things like that. So we know that you probably get hundreds, thousands of cases perhaps in fair housing issues in the Detroit area. So from an attorney's perspective, what are some of your recommendations when we're working with homeowners who refuse to be inclusive, who direct us that they do not want to work with specific protected classes? What kind of advice can you give us?
I mean, we have a almost publishable level guide to address the kind of common questions that you deal with. But it really, I would like to see everybody on board. In other words, if someone makes that kind of a statement, they only want to deal with some groups or another, that be challenged. Say, look, the law requires, or you find a more maybe a general way of saying it, but there's no way that I can go along with that. It's never permitted to exclude it or any particular group of people. The other part is kind of a positive way to approach it, which I always prefer. If you're, what kind of a community do you aspire to? What would you like to see? The idea is a diverse variety of backgrounds, economic, racial, religious. That's what we should want to do. I mean, I've seen groups where they want to restrict housing to people within their own religious group, very common. I had some agents, realtors, I would be careful to use the right word. And they thought that, well, it's a commercial property, you can restrict it. And, well, you can restrict it, for example, a mosque only selling to Muslims, or a church only selling to another church, or whatever. And misunderstanding that the Fair Housing Act only covers residential property, but Michigan law fills the gap. It's illegal to do it. A church property or any religious property has to be offered to everyone. And if you look at it that way, right, we can live in a society where we can acknowledge people that are different, and we enjoy that kind of an interaction. So set up the goal of what true diversity really means. We give lip service to it. We all do.
I think that sometimes, we recognize, first of all, I love the definition that to have a more inclusive, a more diverse community is really the way to go, and that just because somebody isn't of the same faith doesn't mean they can't understand what you're looking for and work with you. I like that opportunity to educate other people. I think quite frequently, as you just mentioned, the realtor may not be aware. They just say things without being fully aware that they're stepping into an issue. And quite frankly, there's a lot of people in a lot of places that don't pay their rent. So, we try to avoid being that specific. So
other complaints we haven't gotten a case like this, but the complaints I've gotten this from broker, and I'm using the word broker correctly.
Yes.
Where they see realtors being not as careful as they should be in some of the social media, some of the listings, where they have to really be on guard. I know the Fair Housing Act 3604C or 804C talks about discriminatory statements, so it can be oral or written. but it only needs to indicate simple preference. It's not turning down somebody, just a preference leaning toward one group or another will be a violation. So you're basically always on the clock. Assume that everything you say orally or written can come out and could be used against you. And I always tell somebody, think of someone else, any discussion that you have, pretend there's a third person listening in. Or would they be comfortable? If you're communicating with the buyer, if the seller heard it, what would the seller think of that, what you were saying, and vice versa? And if you keep that in mind, I think you'll be in a lot better shape than if you're just a little bit careless. I mean, because you're trying to make a deal, you're trying to get it closed, but you really have to be careful.
Great advice. And you know, we try to educate our realtors fully, but obviously not everybody's going to get it right off the bat. So I think that's great advice. You know, just because the third person isn't there, what would they think or say if they heard you saying that? And quite frankly, it's, you know, do the right thing because it's the right thing. Do you find that there are more discriminatory acts? And I think I know the answer to this, but let's, you know, I'd love to get your perspective. More discriminatory acts with regard to renting property as opposed to, and I mean, you know, on the part of landlords or property managers, as opposed to a home seller or realtor.
Absolutely. In a variety of reasons for it. I think one of the main reasons are economic or socioeconomic. Red tenants tend to have lower income. They lack the financial resources. They have difficulty bouncing back as much. I also see, you know, a couple cases that I mentioned where it didn't actually go. There was a third one now where we had a black woman contacted our office. She had over about $1 million in liquid assets and made an affluent white community, made cash offers and couldn't seem to buy a home. It happened several times. So we waited for her to give us the details and information about it, when she made the offer, the listing agreement, who the real estate agents were and so forth, who the owner and sellers were, and she didn't get it. So I'm assuming she's able to get a home and really didn't want to go through all the stress of litigation. So that doesn't reach us. Some of the discrimination in race discrimination in landlord-tenant occurs in high affluent areas where minority blacks are trying to rent. Another thing that we see, you know, again, getting back to the income level, poor are economically vulnerable. They're never too far away from being evicted, and it's not easy for them to go and get alternative housing. The low income tend to be minority, higher percentage of minority. Unlike other fair housing centers, we still have the majority of our cases are race discrimination cases. Others have more disability-related cases than race cases. They also tend to be people with disabilities or disability-related income. They generate a lot of our complaints, and most of the majority of our complaints come from women with women and women with children. So those are kind of things. For example, Warren is 8th in the nation in eviction rates as of last study I saw in 2016. What part of Warren do you think those evictions are originating from? You can guess. That kind of a thing. So we really have to be aware of these things. Another factor is a crisis in affordable housing, especially for extremely low income households in that. And there isn't habitable housing. We get a number of housing related complaints with habitability. However, I would say this, we are targeting the sales market. We're always targeting the sales market and in the more affluent outlying areas. U of M put our complaint data together for a 9-year period, and we're just not getting complaint activity in northern Oakland and Macomb County. Now, whether some of those may be rural areas in that, but we have to do more at our end to increase our presence out there. But we are definitely interested in any kind of discrimination in the sales market, absolutely. And in the commercial market as well. There's discrimination that occurs there as well. I just don't think it gets reported with the same degree of frequency.
Yeah, and you know, with regard to that, you know, and it wasn't necessarily in my list of questions to you, but I'm sure you can let us know. So how would somebody find you? You know, when we're experiencing these issues, is it best to go online to your website? Is there a phone? You know, and we will provide a link to your website with this information. What's the best?
We got a new website coming out, but that's how people tend to find us 2 ways. One, they go online, do a self-search on discrimination. They find us in. majority of our complaints come in through phone calls. We do get some online through our website. Rare that we'll get a fax type of a complaint coming in that way. And that's if people find out on their own, but more often it comes through a referral. Someone will be told to contact us or suggested that they contact us. We get some of our best cases come from realtors. There's no question about it. Realtors have the expertise and knowledge to know when something really looks discriminatory, and have done it, provided good information, laid out the chronology of it. That's very, we give that, a lot of weight coming from a realtor, you could imagine. It doesn't mean the realtor is going to be dragged into the whole thing. It just means give us the information and let us do what we need, we need to do.
I'm very happy to hear that a large portion of these issues are reported by or through realtors. That makes me
I wouldn't say a large portion, but we do have people report it, as they should.
Right, good. And how easy is that to do, to report it? I think a lot of times people think it's a very complicated set of circumstances. Share with us a little bit about that.
Oh, we have a kind of, we do a complaint intake form. It's a page long, and there's the things that we're required for grant purposes. We have to, report, even if it's a disability case, we still have to report race and different things like that. And then just a short scenario of what the circumstances are. It's very short. An intake could go anywhere from 20 minutes to 35, 40 minutes max. And for example, if a realtor reports it, well, we would be then contacting the prospective buyer or the tenant, or it could even be a landlord, it could be anybody, but we, most of the information gathering would go through them. I mean, then we would then follow up if the realtor, you have any additional information that, we haven't received from the people involved, are you willing to provide it? And of course, we can then send out testers, black, white testers, or testers with disabilities, or testers with children, and to see, get the information that way. So yeah, it's really, we're not, it's not a red tape type office. We're not.
Right.
It's amazing the results that come from the most notable fair housing cases come from these independent fair housing centers. More than you get from state and local agencies. Again, in Michigan, there's just the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, but we're not adverse to them. We work hand in hand with them. We have a good relationship with them. We work with them. We guide people with filing complaints to Michigan Department of Civil Rights or HUD. We also have a group of independent cooperating attorneys that we can have that are willing to take a case on a contingency basis. And it's something to make sure that people realize too, we have never charged in 42 years, no one has ever paid a dime for our services. So it's either through funds or fundraising, grant funds or fundraising, or sometimes lawsuit proceeds where we actually have a policy where at times we will step in and be a plaintiff.
So two excellent points there. One, that there's no cost to it, and I think that's an important thing to know. But also, not that we should be motivated by this, but that there are testers out there, and so we should be aware of it. I would hope that that's not the motivation to treat people fairly and treat everyone all the same in that scenario, but that there are testers out there. And I think that there's a lot of people that think because of budgetary issues or what have you, that there aren't. And I think that's a good point.
It's unchanged. Our testing activities are unchanged. They look to be unchanged for the foreseeable future. I would say what makes us unique too is we have a contract with HUD. We also have a contract with 11 other jurisdictions. A couple counties in various cities and township within Wayne, Oakland, Macomb counties. We work with them, so we test those areas as well. So there has been no drop off. In fact, we're looking to probably increase our testing activities. I'm not saying that realtors are the focus of our testing. I mean, ideally, realtors are the professional most knowledgeable in terms of fair housing. It's assumed they are, but we're not actually out to get anybody. The goal is not to go and start a lawsuit. The goal is to have people conform their conduct to fair housing requirements. That's the goal. Right. So it's not, we're not out to get anybody. We're not out to drive somebody out of business. No, we want people to be fully in compliant with fair housing requirements. That's what it is. And it's fair. That's what anybody would want.
Right, right. It's similar to our code of ethics, where we prefer it to be educational as opposed to punitive. that, you know, the education portion of it will lay out a better future.
And it's a last resort if you have to go the court route. That is supposed to be the last resort. So yeah, I'm not saying we don't get the maximum amount in a case. I mean, there are times where, for example, there may be a pool of people that have been adversely treated. I went with a group of people in drug treatment programs that were all evicted, 60 to 70 people out of an apartment complex. Wow. In Canton. And because they were in that program, the nursing program, it's like the nonprofit that ran the program, provided housing, never late in 15 years, paid upwards of $20,000 a month, and suddenly they want a new ownership, management wants to come in and evict all the people in that program. And so you just scratch your head, like, and so then you talk to the people and find out when they walked in the first day that they moved in, they said, well, are you part of that program? In other words, if you're part of that program, well, then you're a different group of person as opposed to everybody else. So those are the kind of things that we see.
Poor business decision too. Man, you got somebody that paid their rent on time for 15 years.
Oh, and not only they confirm it in an email saying, oh, well, you know what? I'm sure you're going to have no problem, the management company, you're going to have no problem finding another place to stay because you have such a great payment record.
Right.
Just
crazy.
Okay, so great. Well, we'll rent to them.
Right. So, so we talk about fair housing starts with us. That, you know, realtors in our industry have an obligation to educate and to provide the tools that will help individuals become more inclusive, especially when we talk about landlords or property managers, or even in some cases, home sellers and certainly professional realtors. What do you think is the best tool that we can utilize, and how can we, in your opinion, educate folks, not just the general public, but other realtors as well, with regard to fair housing issues?
I would have everyone adopt kind of an affirmative marketing policy, and that applies. And that means expanding housing choices for people. Consider people to be a little bit broader in the areas that they're looking at and the homes that they're willing to consider. And in other words, you know, you want to make sure that you're just not marketing white areas to whites and black areas to black, but you actually say, you know, you may consider some other areas. You may just to open up those kind of possibilities. You want it to be something from a total office, from the top all the way down, from the minute someone walks in the door all the way through, and that's just to understand that that's how we do. And that kind of affirmative policy, open policy, is reflected in all that we do. The kind of advertising, where the advertising gets placed, selection of models or pictures, who's in the pictures that you're showing. You can't have all white, all black models, and your employees, that you have some diversity with your employees, training and staff. So just it's just kind of the way that you do things, and to make sure that differences among people are appreciated and respected and acknowledged, and it's fine. A true professional looks past those things anyways. Doesn't matter to me. It shouldn't matter what your background is. Another part is to say something positive about all communities. If you're asked about it, right, you're not selling one community over the other. You find something good to say about every community. Another one is really affirm the wishes of people that make non-traditional, pro-integration type choices. And it's surprising because you would think that, well, segregation is not such a problem anymore. We're still second in the nation. And you can say, well, Southfield has a high minority population now. But if you start to drill down by school district, you find out there's a black area Southfield, there's a white area Southfield. And you can go through all the communities that way, and you find out, well, we still have some segregation issues as well. And then really operate this way too, overall, that fair housing, one housing market is a reality, and all housing is open to everybody. That's what it is. And not, you know, as a guy, I did a case out in Kalamazoo, and he was trying to get into Portage. He had been on a waiting list for years. There were three people, him, a black friend, and a white woman. The three of them were really close friends. And the two of them were on the waiting list for years. She got offered twice the opportunity to come in and rent. And in the last months of his life, he goes, I understand. That's just the way things are. And that's the mindset I really want to fight against. We do not go by, well, that's the way things are. We go from the way things should be. That's the goal. That's the model. That's what we have in our mind. So proceed as though there is no problem. There are no racists. There is no racism or any kind of prejudice or bias. And that's how we live our life. And that's what we hold other people accountable to. There is no status quo. It's not everybody else is doing it. Wipe all that away. That's kind of the mindset that you have to have. How do you treat somebody when they come in the office? Do you assess them real quick? Are they really the kind of person that is going to go through that process successfully? I want to say one thing too. I talk a lot about the rental market, and that, to me, and I say this again and again and again, is the realtors are the heroes because you achieve home ownership for people.
Right.
That's, whether it's Detroit, any other community, we still have that large gap when it comes to home ownership by race, whether it's Black or Hispanic. That needs to bridge that gap. The goal for a family to acquire wealth, it has education benefits, health benefits, cultural benefits, is home ownership. So realtors are the heroes in that, not just preventing discrimination, but getting people into home ownership. That's the goal. And your heroes, your work is very important. We support it, we applaud it. So don't think of us just as the fair housing hammer to come down on people.
Right.
We think you're outstanding. Bring us in like you're doing and have us talk to people, and they can kind of see we're on the same page.
You actually touched on a point that when we teach fair housing and we talk about the code of ethics, just to having an overall policy and a marketing strategy that's all inclusive, that trickles down from the top to the bottom and everybody gets it. And I think of all the things you may have said with regard to a realtor today, that's probably the best because we don't think in those terms. And so, I think that's great.
I tell people, look at their own life. Ask yourself who your friends are, what they look like.
Right.
I mean, is your world kind of narrow and it's only group like yourself? Well, then that's going to be reflected in your work. So you've got to broaden your horizons. Right. I mean, we can't even, politics is a classic one. People can't even talk about it anymore, right? Yeah. I mean, please, put all that stuff aside. There are more important things. People love their families, right? They all do.
Yeah.
They pretty much care about the place that they live. Everybody wants a home where it's peaceful. Is your home peaceful? You have conflicts in your home or in your community, or you want everybody. Let's start talking about some of the common things that we have. But those are the kind of things. And then, the hammer on it would be, look, this is your policy. It's all inclusive. It covers your organization. If someone is not on board with affirmative, marketing and sales practices, then they really shouldn't be working here. And right. that's something that you drill in day one, and it never changes. And just because you've been here 25, 30 years and you're a great, producer, and you don't get a free ride.
Right.
And I have mentioned about sex discrimination and harassment, that bears into it as well. That should never play a role either. You don't see it as much in the sales market, but you see it in the rental market. Tragic when that occurs.
Right. So, Steve, thank you so much for this great information. Again, I'll go back to realtors are heroes. I love that. And I've always believed that as well. So,
I've said that for years. I have the same, I'll say the same thing in front of any group, period. I'll say the same thing in front of any group. And I would extend that to people that do loans, loan officers, underwriters, doing the same thing. You can do all the work on making the sale. If they can't get that loan to go through, right, you can't close the deal. So they're very, very important too. And it's harder for someone that's lower income, more marginal credit. It's a lot more work, but really consider it as a profession, not just dollars and cents. It's a profession. Right. And we make progress one homeowner at a time, one buyer at a time. So, but don't for a second think that your work and your efforts are not appreciated.
Right.
I don't think you hear that enough, especially from people where I sit. You don't hear that.
Right.
All
Right.
you hear about us coming after you and looking for ways we can catch you doing something wrong. That's not the right approach.
Yeah.
Right? Like I said,
You,
if you see a problem, report it, please.
right. You get us, Steve, and that we'll end on that comment. If you see it, report it, and we appreciate the work you do on behalf of everybody, and your focus on fair housing. We feel it's very important. It's a huge part of our realtor world and our code of ethics. And thank you so much for sharing your information, your expertise with us
Thank
today.
you, Steve.
Yeah, thank you. Again, you do it not because it's a code of ethics. You do it because it's the right thing.
Exactly.